You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than should you tell your parents you're adopted, that question would have to be, Mark, is the Minox CD155DB a premium camera worthy of the Minox pedigree, or is it just a mongrel of a point and shoot that should be put into a sack full of rocks and thrown off the bridge with all the other runts of the photographic litter? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. Now, when we're talking premium point-and-shoots, Minox probably isn't a name that comes to mind in the hallowed galleries of 1990s cool. You have your Olympus Muse, your Contax Ts, and those upmarket offerings from Nikon. And yes, if you insist, I will take that spare Nikon 35 Ti that you have lying around unused in your cupboard, strictly for the purposes of making educational content, obviously. But Minox is a pretty well-established company, famous firstly for its subminiatures, offering tiny Leicas to well-heeled children and espionage operatives alike. Their biggest drawcard to serious photographers, rather than any Get Smart wannabe though, is probably their Minox 35 range that manages to take a 35mm roll while still in a surprisingly minuscule package. What they lacked in size, and let's be honest, probably a bit of reliability given the sensitive shutter and electronics inside these things, they make up for with a sharp f2.8 lens. eBay, it's a Minox mausoleum with plenty of secondhand excellent plus offerings imploring me to read the ads so I can find out that they don't actually work. This copy, it's mint, though you might find that the broken shutter is a bit challenging when it comes to getting those gallery-worthy images. Finding a working one will push the price up into the hundreds, and even then, if you hold it up to your ear, you can probably still hear that time bomb ticking. To be fair, the same is probably true with this model, the CD155DB, though strangely enough, you don't hear this one being raved about by analog influencers. In fact, I struggled to find much about this camera at all, other than on one site, submin.com, whose design aesthetic suggests that they're still living in the time this camera was produced. They claim the CD155 has all of the qualities that make the Minox 35 so legendary. I wasn't convinced. I mean, we're comparing a zoom point and shoot with an f2.8 fixed 35mm lens. Still, for verification purposes, I did ask Google Gemini, and it has assured me that yes, this is in fact god-tier optics in a clever package. So now our expectations have been set unreasonably high, and it's time to actually put these claims to the test. As is often the case for me, this was just a quick walk around the block, or even up and down the South China Sea foreshore, since I found myself in Kota Kinabalu in Borneo overnight a while back and had a sliver of a window of an opportunity to take some photos. Now, this is not my first point-and-shoot rodeo. I know that to give it its best chance, I needed to use 400 speed film, so I had with me a roll of Fuji 400, which is about as budget as you can get. Then it's really just a case of loading it into the camera, letting it wheeze and whine as it draws in that film, and taking it out, wheezing and whining my own way up the KK boardwalk as the rain started to set in. like the reflections off the tables, you see. One of those classic mark symmetry shots. Give me some of those corrugations and variegations. Screaming for wide angle, and it's not going to get wide angle. This doesn't have macro that I can see. Auto, no macro. I should have read the manual, but I'll just assume, well, it's point and shoot. I deserve it. The Minox CD155DB is an awkwardly named beast, but it seems par for the course for a lot of these cameras, and it didn't do C3PO or R2D2 any harm.
That isn't very reassuring.
But hey, it's a point and shoot, and sometimes anonymity is the best defense. As for that legendary Minox lens though, are you convinced? Got to admit, half a roll in and I'm on the fence. In terms of handling, it's a bit bigger than a lot of similar cameras out there, and this isn't such a bad thing really. It feels pretty solid in the hand, and that textured surface actually has a nicer feel than many of the plastic fantastics out there. The really fantastic part of this product probably though is that 155mm focal length at the long end. I mean, the opportunity for a long telephoto lens on a small camera sounds too good to be true, right? Well, it is. If you look at this example, you can see that the end result just doesn't live up to the phallic fantasy of that 155mm. Yes, it's fantastic in a way that means that it's make-believe, and whoever decided to put a 155mm lens inside this camera was living in the land of unicorns. Well, I live in the real world, and even a place as wonderful as Kota Kinabalu doesn't look so great when you're left with shaky images. I'm saying shaky because, while it's certainly true that 155mm in a point and shoot is never something you're going to take out with you when you're whale watching, its greatest weakness would have to be that slow shutter speed that you get resulting from the pinhole opening. Because at 155mm you're dealing with a maximum aperture of f10.7. Or is it f11.1? One of the challenges of a fairly rare camera like this is that it's hard to get any definitive information about it, with conflicting information firstly about the aperture but also about the features. I mean, you tell me, is that a macro mode in the manual? Everything here points to this being the same camera, but as you heard just then, no macro mode on mine. I can only assume that I'm using the wrong deodorant, because Minox does not want me getting close up to anything with my version of this camera. So the specs I have about this camera are dubious at best, but take them in anyway and be blown away by the mediocrity that this device is capable of. Really, it has nothing to distinguish itself in terms of features. Yes, you have a few flash modes, including slow shutter, that can be useful at night, particularly if you're on a tripod, though who will be carrying around a tripod with this camera? It also has the ubiquitous red eye reduction as well as a self-timer, but really that's it. Oh, apart from that date back, of course, you'll notice that crept in on a couple of the shots, so yes, you can relive 1998 like it's 1998. At least you know when this camera was made. Minox are actually still around today, but they obviously know something we don't because the date taps out in 2049, presumably aligned with Armageddon and the second coming of the great spaghetti space monster. In any case, this is a relic from a different time, and a time when convenience obviously won out against quality. Shooting with it, well, you just follow the standard point and shoot protocol of pointing at your subject, half pressing, moving to recompose, and then taking the photo. So in that sense, it's just a typical point and shoot. Nothing to set it apart really other than that legendary Minoxar lens. But how legendary is it really? Well, by the next morning, the rain had stopped. Let's finish off that roll and then come back and talk about image quality. That's a nice picture, but it deserves to be a panorama. And on a point and shoot, you cannot set manual exposure, and you need manual exposure if you want to actually combine multiple images. Yep. So, 1990s snapshot coming up. What about something a little bit closer up? Not fully zoomed in, or not fully zoomed in, yeah, that's probably, doesn't actually tell you, but that's how far it can go. Kind of photos that everybody says, why did you take a photo of that? Get a little bit closer, I don't need the emergency stuff. I quite like the hello and the flag behind it. Could probably do a bit better coming a bit further back and zooming in a bit to get some compression. It'll put the Malaysian flag out of focus. Or will it really? I don't know. Oh, it's 155 millimeters, that's too much. Too much to be practical, but. One world wipes out the other. I think this is a good example of where we're at with public telephony. Again, why would anyone take a picture of that? Is that a photo? Now, this is where I wish I could go a little bit wider. All right, so this one's going to be fully zoomed in. I'm going to try and capture the bright reflection on the window of the boat. I wonder what it'll look like on film. Quick while that thing in the middle. Oh, that was shit. Bad framing. And surely this isn't the shittiest of the shitty. It's got to be one of the better ones, but we shall see. All right. And no, I can't fit that in. What if I shoot through this? Can I do that? Just like that, the scene. Here comes another boat. That'll do. Not the same. The other shot was a bit better, but I can see I'm weirding them out. Set it wide. 38 could be considered wide. And shoot. Alright, let's go. Dude, I've got one more left. I'll use it on the way back. I don't know, I just want to use it on that, and I probably shouldn't, but maybe I could. So another walk around the block with another crappy camera. But is this crappy really? Look, if I'm going to be honest, the Minox CD155 isn't the first camera that I reach for when I want to go out and take photos. I think, firstly, it's the size is just being that bit bulky for this type of device. Then you've got the surprising lack of features, such as no macro or infinity setting. That said, look, it's no more unpleasant than any other point and shoot to use, and I have managed to get some decent results with it over time. But there is one major Achilles heel to this camera, and that is that 155mm lens. As you can see, on a dull day, I struggle to get a sharp image zoomed in, even with 400 ISO film. And you'll notice that there's also that fingernail flare in the corner. There's possibly a light leak, or at the very best an internal reflection in that comically long lens barrel. Given all these flaws and compromises, you do have to wonder why they even bothered to kit it out with such a long telephoto, particularly when combined with such a small aperture. Now, this isn't something unique to this camera. I have a Pentax 120SW that suffers from the same problem, and do check that video out if you want to see more of my photographic failures. Look, I'm going to chalk it up to hubris, that triumph of ambition over capability. Fortunately, I have spent my whole life tempering my own ambitions to make up for my own deficits, but even now, well, look, to be honest, I'm still a little bit disappointed by the Minox CD155DB. Look, it's a fine camera for the most part, and if I don't get a great image from it, then maybe some of that responsibility does have to lie with me. I'm not the most careful when it comes to developing film, for example. I only had an hour or two to blast through a roll of film to memorialise my whistle-stop trip to Kota Kinabalu, and in that sense, it did okay. The flash works well, and as you can see, I came to rely on it in a couple of the dimmer locations, even though it's not a look that I'm particularly fond of. Distortion is quite low too. I mean, I wouldn't rely on it for architectural photography, but if you look at this picture, then you can see that it handles vertical and horizontal straight lines okay. Let's try and find 6 Malaysian moments made manifest with the Minox and make these be our half-baked half dozen. You'll see that despite the overabundance of boat photos, only one of them made the cut, and that's because it's the only one that's reasonably sharp. This one is pretty typical of my style. I'm really only including it because if you look at the water droplets, it does show that this camera can be sharp where it counts, and the background is actually pleasing for such a modest camera, with the blur not being too jittery or distracting at all. This one is nice and sharp and probably more interesting than this photo of a Malaysian flag. I had to include one image with the flag in it just so that I can remember that I was there. I did wonder about whether to include this one of the kiosk, but in the end decided that the boats in the background make for a marginally more interesting and slightly less cluttered image. I don't know, you tell me, and while you're at it, tell me if these human shots float your boat more than the actual floating boats. Most of all, tell me if you're at all familiar with the Minox CD155DB. It's a different class of camera to Minox's smaller prime lens offerings, and while there were a few zoom variants like this, they don't seem very common. Maybe you've had some experience and you can let us know in the comments. And while you're here, feel free to like, subscribe, share, and ring that notification bell because I have too many point and shoots and I'm slowly working my way through them on this channel to find out which are the best. If I'm going to sum up this one, I'm going to give it a B+. Nice work with a few basic errors. In the end, it's not going to rival the quality of more substantial and substantially more expensive cameras. It's a point and shoot, and my experience is that even those supposed legends in its class have their compromises. So best not to have too high expectations and treat this one for what it is, at least until I can get my hands on a Contax T2 or Nikon 35 Ti later.